Welcome to the AI4EU Café for live presentations around AI. Today, the speaker is Holger Hoos. Hello, Holger.
Good to be here.
I hope you're well. Holger Hoos from the Universiteit Leiden, the Netherlands. He's the coordinator of ICT48 project Vision, with his talk on United in Diversity, thoughts on the future of AI made in Europe. This cafe session is a cross-project collaboration between the Horizon 2020 European Research Projects, Vision, and AI4EU. My name is Carmen McWilliams. I'm the Director of Grassroots Arts, and I'm partner in the AI4EU project. And as always in the beginning, please take notice, this session will be recorded. The recording of this live web session will be available afterwards if Holger allows to publish it. And no confidential information shall be shared in this cafe session. And in this cafe, the speakers express their personal view and opinions. This is not necessarily the official AI4EU project opinion. So, and what is this cafe about? It is a meeting place for all the AI scene in Europe. Sorry, slide went too quick. You can gain insights into the European AI scene. Participant gets the chance to share knowledge and experiences and meet stakeholders from various areas of AI research and application. So I see that you are all coming in, dear participants. I'm very happy you join us today. Thank you. And you know it's interactive, so we really need your help. Please send us your questions. The cafe lives of you, of your co-moderation, please. We are looking forward. Send them per text. There's a chat on the right side. And for questions, please send it to us. And I'm going to read them afterwards to Holger, who is our speaker today. So, but now to the main point, to Holger. Now I will introduce you, and then afterwards I give the podium to Holger. Holger Hoos is Professor of Machine Learning at Universiteit Leiden, the Netherlands, and Adjunct Professor of Computer Science at the University of British Columbia in Canada. He's a Fellow of the Association for Computing Machinery and Fellow of the Association for the Advancement of Artificial Intelligence, Fellow of the European AI Association, and past President of the Canadian Association for Artificial Intelligence, and one of the initiators as well as Chair of the Board of CLAIR, an organization that seeks to strengthen European excellence. Sorry, I have to do one thing. I'm coming back to you. One little problem. Sorry, please be. So, all is fine. So back to CLAIR. CLAIR is an organization that seeks to strengthen European excellence in AI research and innovation. He also leads the ICT48 Vision Coordination mandate for the newly created European Networks of Centers of Excellence in AI. Holger is well known for his work across a broad range of topics in artificial intelligence, notably on the automated design of high-performance algorithms. He is one of the originators of the concept of automated machine learning. So in short, AutoML. It is a pleasure to have you here. Thank you. Great that you're here, Holger. Now I'm giving you the podium.
Thank you very much. The pleasure, of course, is all mine. Let's see that we can actually get these slides displayed. So hopefully you can now see my slides.
Yes.
Yeah, wonderful to speak here in the AI4EU Café about a topic that's very near to my heart. And it's, you know, when I came back from Canada 20 years after I had left, I really felt it was very good to be back and to be united in the diversity that we have across Europe. And that isn't just cultural diversity, that's also diversity across AI, but most importantly, it's diversity of perspective. And that truly is a wonderful and very powerful thing. And in a sense, the central topic of my presentation today. So artificial intelligence is the future, not only for Europe, but for all humankind. It comes with colossal opportunities, but also threats that are difficult to predict. Whoever becomes the leader in this sphere will become the ruler of the world. Well, that has a bit of a strange ring to it. And in fact, it's not exactly the way it was said. It was said not only for Russia, but for all humankind by Vladimir Putin on the 1st of September, 2017. Forward-looking chap. And I think, unfortunately, he's quite right regarding the key role of AI in terms of global influence. Now, in order to understand why one would come to such a judgment, first of all, I think it's good to remind ourselves what actually is AI. And that is not a meaningless question, because even those of us who are very active in the area of AI, research, innovation, applications, we sometimes have discussions about what exactly falls within the scope of artificial intelligence. So for me, there's a very simple way to think about this. Let's start with intelligence. And the only intelligence that we truly understand, at least to some extent, is of course our own human intelligence. And that has two key components: learning and reasoning. Surely there can't be intelligence without the ability to learn, especially from one's mistakes. And surely there can't be intelligence without the ability to reason. And I want to point out that reasoning is the part of intelligence that, prior to the so-called machine learning revolution, has received most of the focus, right? When you think of famous intelligent people like Einstein, Sherlock Holmes, Spock, right? Then you think more of logic than you actually think of learning. And indeed, artificial intelligence, if we see intelligence as learning plus reasoning and maybe a bunch of other things, then artificial intelligence should certainly involve machine learning and automated reasoning. And that's precisely the way I propose we think about AI. But in order to truly see why AI is such a fantastic key enabling technology, it's helpful to think about AI as something rather different, namely the automation of computer programming. Now, computers and IC technology is basically all around us, right? It's running major parts of our life and of our world, for the better or the worse. And therefore, to automate the error-prone and very complicated job of programming computers is, of course, a very big deal. And AI is, to a large extent, precisely about that. And that is the reason why AI will change everything. Here is a nice headline that appeared on Wired magazine a little while ago, saying AI algorithms are now shockingly good at doing science. And that is indeed true. And I would go further and I would say, 10, 20, 30 years from now, an increasing number, and in the end, probably almost all scientific breakthroughs will involve the use of AI systems and techniques as tools, amongst others, of course. AI is key to better science, to better engineering, but also to better public administration increasingly. It is also one of the key ingredients to solving the grand problems of our time, such as climate change, pandemics, inequity, and a whole host of others. AI also, for that reason, is the key to the future of Europe. And it's very good to see that the European Commission and other European institutions, but also the member states and associated countries, are keenly aware of that and very much share that view. You could get a very good impression of that just a week ago, last Wednesday, when the European Commission announced around noon their proposed regulation in the area of AI and their revised coordinated action plan for future investment into AI. So speaking of the future, what will this future actually look like, especially here in Europe? And here I want to present to you three different scenarios. We'll start with a scenario that I call the distant third, scenario C. This is where European AI is pretty much what it is now, but maybe with a larger gap, namely a distant third to American and Chinese AI. This is a tough thing to say, but I think we really have to face it, that the American and Chinese entities, enterprises, government, and so on, that are pursuing AI currently do have a certain lead, and that lead is widening, and it's widening pretty rapidly in part due to the enormous investments that are being made there, and also because once you get good at AI, it becomes easier to get even better at AI. So in this scenario, there will be a large gap in tech and research capability and a strong dependency in Europe on technology designed and also run elsewhere. Top talent will be mostly displaced, or as we can now see in the pandemic, working remotely for global technology leaders anchored mostly in the United States, as far as Europe is concerned. And European subsidiaries will mostly focus on compliance with EU rules and regulations. So yes, our rules and regulations will have an effect. Yes, they will create additional jobs. Yes, they will protect European citizens from undesirable effects, but they will not make sure by themselves that the key action on AI is actually happening in Europe. How are we going to get into the distant third scenario? Well, this is a scenario that we end up in if developments in Europe continue to be funded through the usual mechanisms, and successes will then mostly benefit non-European entities through brain drain and acquisition. And that's what we've been seeing for the past few years, actually. And I think unless things change rather drastically, more drastically than we see in the coordinated action plan, more on this later, I think unfortunately, this is the most likely scenario. In this scenario, most of our data will be processed in Europe because of regulation, but it will be using and also fueling technologies mostly made elsewhere. And the data sharing arrangements with entities located outside of Europe will be highly asymmetrical. Also, most investment made by European companies and the public sector to deploy and leverage AI capabilities will end up benefiting companies and economies outside of Europe, which cannot be in our best interest. So this certainly is a scenario that is not particularly attractive to us. But of course, it's not inevitable, right? So let's therefore look at something that's a little bit more palatable. I call that scenario B, niches and specialties. And it's exactly like scenario C, the distant third, except that now we do have islands of European excellence, such as the car industry. So these islands tend to be small and pretty highly specialized, but of course lucrative. The economic benefits that will arrive from them will be very uneven and will at large, I'm afraid, be outweighed by a broad dependence on technology made elsewhere. So in other words, outside of these islands, we'll still be very much dependent on others. How do we get into this niches and specialty scenarios? Well, this is what happens when European investment in AI is mostly focused on areas of existing strength and specialization. A very natural thing to do, but also one, of course, that reinforces these existing niche and specialties and sort of makes it difficult to compete across the board. In this scenario, still most of our data is processed in Europe, but again, using and fueling technologies made elsewhere, and the data sharing arrangements are mostly asymmetrical, except for these islands of excellence. Investments made by European companies in the public sector for deploying and leveraging AI capabilities will here mostly benefit Europe because they will happen and will be focused in these islands of specialization, but they will be offset by the cost of technology developed elsewhere. So this is a much more palatable scenario, but still, it's not the one we really want. Let's therefore look at scenario A. We call that global leadership. And that means that Europe is a global leader in AI and the global leader in human-centric, trustworthy artificial intelligence. Here, Europe will have AI research and tech capabilities comparable to the US and China in combination with clear leadership in human-centric, trustworthy AI. And notice that this is not an island, it's a style of AI that's cross-cutting. Also, Europe in this scenario can and should have clear leadership in a global coalition of the willing that's strongly committed to AI for good and AI for all. AI for good means AI for the pursuit of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and therefore for the good of humanity, and AI for all means AI for all stakeholders, for all parts of the societies that make up Europe and elsewhere. Here, Europe will be equally attractive to top talent as the US and China, not necessarily to exactly the same people, but to a comparable number of people. And now, of course, we want to know, how do we end up in this rather attractive scenario? And in my expert opinion, really the way to get there is through broad, large-scale investment through novel instruments and programs. And it is precisely that I'm afraid last Wednesday we saw very little of yet. So here, we want to develop world-class European capabilities in all crucial AI technologies, and we want to be world leading in about a third to half of these. And I think that's entirely realistic given where Europe has been historically on AI and where we stand right now. Also, given how the Commission and the national governments have positioned us so far, because I wouldn't see that as a failure. I would see this as a promise that is unfulfilled yet, right? But we're positioned actually reasonably well. Here, most of our data is actually processed in Europe using and fueling technologies made in Europe, and data is shared beyond Europe on a level playing field. Clearly, that's what the Commission wants. Clearly, that's what we should want as well. Now, there are 6 lessons that I believe we haven't properly learned yet, and I want to spend some time sharing them with you and motivating them. Because I think these are lessons that we need to embrace fully in order to get into this very desirable scenario A. And the first of those is that leadership in human-centered, trustworthy AI, the very thing that the European Commission very rightly focuses on, requires leadership in AI broadly defined. You can't take AI technologies developed elsewhere and just tack on the human-centered, trustworthy aspects. That's not how it works. Actually, human-centered and trustworthy is harder to do than just plain AI, but it has to be built from the ground up. Of course, one can use sort of non-human-centered, not especially designed to be trustworthy techniques as the basis, but it's not a simple add-on. It's a different style of research, innovation, and deployment. That's very important to realize. So we cannot be leaders in human-centered, trustworthy AI in Europe unless we're also leaders in AI. And that implies that we can't be world leaders in regulation without being world leaders in innovation as well. And I'm sure that the Commission understands this very well. Listening to Executive Vice President Vestager last Wednesday made this reasonably clear. But leadership in AI innovation also requires leadership in AI research. That's the second thing to learn. You cannot possibly be a leader in innovation if you are not a leader in research. Or, said differently, maybe you can, but it's not a particularly attractive proposition because you will always depend on leadership coming from elsewhere in the basic technology. And that can be very, very costly and also can lead to delays that are not exactly good in terms of market penetration and success. So that is something that I also believe the European Commission understands somewhat well, but ultimately doesn't realize for what it fully is and doesn't support yet to the extent that it needs to be supported. And in order to get a better glimpse of this, all you have to do is you have to basically compare the amount of money that's invested into AI research here in the United States and in China, and you do the same for innovation, and you see that actually in both areas we fall pretty short, but particularly in AI research, there's a big gap. Very similarly to this, lesson 3 is that leadership in AI applications requires leadership in the foundations of AI. You can't just take, foundations laid elsewhere in terms of technology, in terms of research, also in terms of regulation, actually, and apply them here. That's not the path to success. And fourth, expertise and talent in AI are critical resources. And because they're critical resources, success is impossible without a sufficient supply of these. The public needs a major stake. We cannot leave it to industry alone to dominate the market for these resources. And that means that the public has to invest. That means that major investments are necessary by the European Commission, by the national governments, by the governments of associated countries, also by NGOs and so on, right? We all need to invest into this in the public sector, because otherwise, if we leave it to industry alone, we get AI for profit rather than AI for the common good. And AI for profit, there's nothing wrong with it, right? But it doesn't quite do all the jobs that we need to have done, especially in light of global challenges such as the current pandemic or global warming indeed. The fifth, and maybe one of the most important lesson, is that in AI, as in many other areas, Europe needs to be united in diversity, because divided, we stumble and fall. The history of Europe is full of examples for that. And it's not just in terms of, you know, armed conflict, war, and so on. It's also in terms of technology. Whenever we can pull together and do things jointly, we're successful. A great example for that is the CE standard that keeps us safe in terms of the products that we use in our daily life, in our households. So Europe has to come together. We have to step up our ambition and investment. And, you know, last Wednesday's announcement was a good step in this direction. I would claim the ambition in terms of regulation is clearly there, and I'm very happy to see that. The ambition in terms of investment, I find still very much lacking compared to what's done elsewhere. I think we're kidding ourselves if we believe that this will be sufficient, particularly the speed at which it's happening and the manner in which it's happening, I think is entirely unsatisfactory. Because what's really needed is new mechanisms for stimulating AI research, innovation, and applications. We don't just need more of the same old. Horizon Europe is going to be great. Horizons 2020 has been great, but these are not the only mechanisms that we need in order to be successful in AI, a very disruptive set of technologies. So how do I think we should invest into AI made in Europe? And Carmen made it very clear, you know, that what I'm saying here is not what AI4EU thinks, but it's also not quite what I just personally think. What I'm going to tell you about now is actually very much the opinion of CLAIR, the Confederation of Laboratories of AI Research in Europe, which is one of the largest AI research and innovation organizations in the world. So it's not just a personal opinion, it's a little bit more, but certainly personally, I feel very strongly that this is the right way to think about it. So first of all, what we need is an innovation booster program for spin-offs, startups, and scale-ups. And while the Commission is doing things in this area that are actually also quite good, I think what's being done is not sufficient. What we need is something far more ambitious and far more disruptive. Secondly, we do need a dedicated AI infrastructure sovereignty program. I cannot believe that the Commission hasn't latched on to this opportunity yet, because everybody talks about technological sovereignty. So what better way to persuade citizens that it's in their best interest to really invest in this and invest in it in a very visible and very ambitious way. What I currently see is more of a hodgepodge of mechanisms that are relatively weakly coordinated. And while certainly there is merit to every single one of them, they don't assemble, in my mind, into a coherent whole. And that is starting to be a massive problem compared to what's being done elsewhere. We need excellent grants in AI, modeled after the ERC grants. This would be a very easy thing to do and quite analogous to the way the highly successful German AI program has modeled its Alexander von Humboldt AI professorships after just the Alexander von Humboldt professorships that they've been running for many years. This is such a simple way of taking a successful program and making it into something specialized for AI that's going to really help us attract and retain talents. I can't believe this hasn't been done already, but I strongly believe it would not only be easy to do, but also entirely the right thing. We need regional AI excellent hubs throughout Europe, and we shouldn't leave it to the member states alone to make that happen. There should be strong coordination at the European level. I see some movement towards that, but it's slow and it's somewhat ineffective. We need to step this up. And finally, last but certainly not least, I think we need a European Lighthouse Center for AI, a CERN for AI. And I want to spend a little bit more time on this because this is something that people are increasingly calling for. And indeed, that you can find the term Lighthouse Center both in the white paper that the Commission released last year and also in the updated coordinated action plan, which actually is very promising. Claire has been calling for that since June 2018. And it's quite obvious that the Commission has taken a page from our book there, not quite by coincidence, because we worked pretty hard on convincing them of the merit of this. And I'm very happy that to a large extent we've succeeded, but this is not in the bag yet. And we have to make sure that now this concept is filled with life in the right way so that it's not a waste of money, but actually has the desired impact. And why this is such an important thing starts with the following observation. You know, there are special places in the world, special places that end up being global attractors for talent. Here on this slide, you can see one of them. I think you all know it. It's Apple Park, the new headquarters of Apple Computers in California. And Apple Park, you know, in the short period that it's existed, has become a symbol for prowess in human-centered technology. It is something that clearly has had and continues to have a huge impact on the kind of technology that many of us are interacting with on a daily basis. And clearly, it's been a huge success in terms of amassing an amount of talent that is probably unparalleled anywhere in the world. In Europe, we have such places too. Here's one of them. That's actually a building on the campus of CERN, together with a whole number of rather happy-looking staff on a beautiful day there on the border of Switzerland and France. CERN also is a global success story, a global European success story, and certainly a global attractor for talent. It's no coincidence that the internet basically has been pioneered there, at least in terms of the World Wide Web and the protocols that drive it. So what is a European Lighthouse Center for AI? It's a center driving science and innovation. It's a place where we develop better technology for a better future. It is a global beacon for European excellence in AI. It aims for impact and recognition similar to CERN, the European Space Agency, and Airbus, all three great European success stories known and admired throughout the world. It will necessarily become a global attractor for talent and expertise, just like CERN is, just like ESA is, and just like Airbus is as well. It will also be a hub and a driver in a pan-European network of research and innovation centers in AI. I'm not proposing to take all the talent we have and focus it on this one place. That would be absolutely ridiculous and the wrong thing to do for Europe. But I am proposing to have a hub for the diverse and distributed European community, a place where they can come together, a focal point, a place of exchange, and a place for the most ambitious projects. So in terms of ambitious projects, what will be done there? Well, of course, globally leading research in AI, right? That's the whole reason why we want that. But also coordinated missions to solve European and global grand challenges in areas such as health, energy, the environment, pandemics, climate change, food production, you name it. Because all of them have enormous potential to be tackled better and faster through AI. Also, this is a place for projects, large-scale projects and knowledge sharing involving all EU member states and associated countries. And notice that I say associated countries. This doesn't stop with the European Union. Obviously, that has to include the UK, Switzerland, Norway, Iceland, and others, just like ESA does as well, and as CERN does. And finally, it's a place from where we can have coordination for a strong and diverse network of national and regional excellence centers in AI, a focal point, as I said before. So in order to make this work, what should we locate there? First of all, I really think we shouldn't leave it to industry to have the world's best compute resources in AI, because that means that we leave it to industry alone to basically determine the next generation of AI techniques and what we can and will do with them. We need a European data center and core compute facility that has #1 compute capability in the world. And of course we can do that, right? With a market 500 million strong, of course we have the option of doing that, just as we had the option for building some of the world's ambitious and largest particle accelerators in the world at CERN. What should also be there is the European Office for AI, Data, Ethics and Compliance. And that is an office that very much would be beneficial in terms of being the focal point of the Commission's very smartly placed emphasis on leading the world in terms of AI regulation for the benefit of citizens and societies. This should basically define an EC standard for ethical, trustworthy, and human-centered AI. And by having it there, where the data is, where the computing is, where the experts spend at least some of their time, everything will work together much better. And of course, we want their world-class experimentation and testing facilities, world-class working and meeting spaces, and world-class support staff, because that's what's needed to do some of the world's most ambitious work in one of the world's most ambitious areas of research and innovation, namely artificial intelligence. So why would we want a single location for all of this? Well, first of all, critical density of talented people and important activities, right? And that is so important. talk to people who have worked at CERN. They will not just talk about the great accelerators that are there, right? In fact, to run these accelerators, you don't need half the people that are currently working at CERN. And in order to analyze the data, you wouldn't have to be at CERN. You could do this anywhere, and people do this anywhere. No, what they will all talk to you about is this wonderful atmosphere when you're surrounded by people who share some of your interests, who complement some of your capabilities, who share the sense of excitement and energy and mission to get hard problems solved. And nothing, we've learned this through the pandemic, nothing can actually replace working together in the same physical space. Meeting at the water cooler, meeting in the cafeteria, meeting for a glass of wine or something or some other beverage in the evening. It's important to bring people together physically. We've learned this in the pandemic for those that haven't already known it before, and I think we all did. A single location also becomes a unifying element, a common reference for an otherwise very diverse network. Finally, it will become a symbol for European ambition and excellence in AI, and symbols can't very well be distributed. In fact, if you compare CERN with something like the European Lab for Molecular Biology, EMBL, they've actually both been around for quite a few decades, similar timeframes, similar ambition, certainly, but one is much better known than the other. And the reason for that is that one has symbol character and the other doesn't because it's distributed. So we need a non-distributed symbol for European ambition and excellence in AI, a special place, something like Apple Park, something like CERN. There is one more argument, and it's actually a money argument. So for those of you who have that focus, you can use the world's best support staff and specific expertise much more efficiently if you actually centralize things, at least to some degree. And along the same lines, of course, there's great synergy in having the scientists, support staff, data, compute power, regulator, and all that in one place, as I mentioned before. So the one argument we often hear, and that is sort of skeptical of this plan is, wouldn't it be impossible to pick a location? And the answer to this is, of course it won't be impossible. Of course it's challenging, but it's not impossible at all, because we're surrounded by examples that show that one central location can be found. CERN is one of these examples. Brussels, the de facto EU capital, is one of these examples. And yes, of course, there are EU facilities outside of Brussels, right? But the concentration, the large concentration, and the big commission building and so on, that's all in Brussels. And there are good reasons why it's that way, why it's not fully distributed. National capitals, there is no highly developed nation that has a distributed capital. The European Central Bank, right? The list goes on and on and on. And they have central locations for precisely the kinds of reasons that I outlined before, right? And they have all solved this problem. Of course, we can simplify the choice of place by design. And the way we do that is that we decide that there should be no permanent scientific staff there, but instead the facility should host excellent scientists from all over Europe and indeed around the world for periods of time, right? For periods of time between a few days all the way to maybe a couple of years, with maybe sort of an emphasis on a sabbatical length stay, right? Something around 6 months or a year. And that would mean that coveted top talent in AI will not be permanently displaced from where it's needed most, namely in its home location. But it will just spend part of their time there and then bring back, radiate out, bring back their experience to their homes. And finally, of course, we can base the choice of location, at least in part, on rational criteria that determine success, such as, is it easy to reach? Is it attractive for people to get to? Can we actually build something big in that place? So what could a lighthouse achieve for us? Well, first of all, I argue that it can be a key mechanism for ensuring global technology leadership for Europe by virtue of giving some of the world's best experts one of the world's best working environments in AI. It will help us to achieve technological sovereignty because it will help us to reverse brain drain, to actually get some of our very best back. It will give us an increased ability to address some of Europe's most significant challenges, such as sustainable growth, climate change, health, and a host of others. And it will do so because it will bring together, at least for periods of time, some of the best minds, some of the best equipment in one of the best environments in the world to focus on these challenges. And finally, I'm deeply convinced it can be a major factor in AI-driven economic growth and scientific acceleration across all member states and beyond. So if you ask me, it's not certain that Europe will become a leader in human-centered, trustworthy AI. I was really seriously hoping that in preparing today's talk, I could tell you, a week ago, I had 3 scenarios. 2 of them I didn't like too much, but thanks to the Commission having made all the right choices, now only 1 of them remains, and I'm enthusiastic about that. Well, it's not quite that simple. I think the Commission has made some smart and very forward-looking decisions, but we're not in the clear. It's nowhere clear that we will live in scenario A, the desirable one where we have a leadership in human-centered, trustworthy AI. Scenarios B and C are still on the table, and we have to be very smart and very determined to not end up in one of them. So yes, we can become a leader in human-centered, trustworthy AI, but we need to act boldly and we need to act now. In terms of legislation, I tip my hat to the Commission. I think they have shown that they're capable of acting boldly and determined to act boldly, and to do so on a reasonable timeline. Now, this will still take time, right? Regulation always does. But at least, it's getting going now. This is great. But in terms of investment, I actually think there's not nearly enough emphasis on the boldness and also on the timeliness of the Commission's action. So this is a banner, a very large banner that the Commission has on their headquarters in 3 languages. Pour une unie die de lat hoger ligt, pour une union plus ambitieuse, for a union that strives for more, for a more ambitious union, right? So the current Commission has put that literally on their building, and that's good, that's fantastic. However, putting it up on the building is not enough. You have to actually execute on it, and here there's work to be done. There are global successes made in Europe. CERN is one of them, ESA is another one, Airbus is a third, and we can think of others. But big success stories like this don't just happen. And this is lesson number 6 that we better learn quick. They are willed into existence. It takes a few determined people in the right positions to make these sorts of things happen. And it's hard to make them happen, very, very hard. We have to create momentum towards making something like this happen, right? This should be our ambition. This is a global success. This is a special place. This is a place that the world looks to. We need something like this for trustworthy human-centered AI made in Europe. Because AI is key to the future of Europe, to our future. To achieve great things, we do need a bold vision. This is where it all starts. We actually need to dream big or to stay home. And especially with AI, if you don't dream big, if you don't think big, it's not going to happen in the way we all want. So this is where I want to spend the last few minutes of my presentation today talking about the CLARE vision, the vision of the Confederation of Laboratories for AI Research in Europe, which was kicked off on the 18th of June 2018, shortly after the Commission unveiled their first plans for supporting excellence in AI across Europe. Very much in support of those plans and in elaboration of these plans, and in an attempt to guide these plans from the bottom up. 600 people, some of the world's best experts, all well-established senior scientists in AI, signed the CLARE vision when it was first released, and a few days later it was already more than 1,000. So what is this vision about? It's essentially a vision for better technology, for a better future, but in a very specific way. because the clear vision calls for artificial intelligence that, rather than trying to replace our human intelligence, attempts to make it better, to augment it, right? To overcome our own biases and limitations. The clear vision is also for European excellence in AI based on values and diversity of perspective, which is a distinctive European strength. And it's for AI made in Europe, for Europe and the world. It doesn't stop in Europe, just like CERN doesn't stop in Europe, and ESA doesn't stop in Europe, and certainly Airbus doesn't stop in Europe, right? But it aims for the impact and brand recognition of those three huge global European success stories. We need to think that big. So CLAIR is for excellence across all of AI, all of its different fields, all of its stakeholders, for all of Europe, with a human-centered focus. And if you think what I've been discussing today somehow sounds appealing, sounds like the right level of ambition, sounds something like you want to get behind, go to clair-ai.org and learn a little bit more. You can read in detail about our vision there, and also about the great network that we've already built in support of this vision, about the 9 governments of European member states that are officially supporting this vision, about the way we've managed to already convince the Commission of the wisdom of some of these actions that we're proposing. Sign up, help us to bring this home, because the future of AI in Europe, to a large extent, will determine your future. With that, thank you very much for your attention, and I very much look forward to answering some of the questions you might have, or responding to your comments. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Holger. Very, very great insight into your vision. I think it's not only vision the project, but you have also vision how we can make AI and us in Europe a leadership. Here comes my question directly in there. So do you think that globally, with AI, we can solve problems like climate change, fight viruses like Corona, and prevent hunger? And do you think we can do this with a European approach, or do we not rather need a global approach?
That's an excellent question. So first of all, I don't just think that we can do this, I know that we can do this, because it's currently going on already. One of the best examples is the vaccines that an increasing fraction of us are getting now, and that of course are the light at the end of the tunnel of the pandemic. And these vaccines, all of them actually have been developed using AI technology as part of the key technology pipeline that made them happen so quickly. So, anybody who has doubts about, AI bringing benefit to situations like this, absolutely, we have now positive evidence for that, right? And I mean, if you don't believe this, look back for how long it took to develop other vaccines before we have these kind of technologies. And of course, it's not just AI, but AI does play a key role in there. And you will see that, the time frame on which this happens is totally unprecedented. And to some extent, this is because advanced computational techniques, including AI techniques, could be brought to the table. And climate change is very, very similar, right? We see great progress on electric vehicles. Now, the design of these vehicles is increasingly guided by AI techniques, right? Some of us are very excited by what's currently happening in the space sector, right? And of course, the space sector is key to better understanding our planet through Earth observation. One of the key factors that has made Earth observation so much more powerful is the ability to cheaply get Earth observation equipment into orbit. And what's key to that? Well, it's the reusability of launch vehicles, right? SpaceX. Now, SpaceX has figured out to do something supremely impressive and difficult, which is to land first stages of rockets, right? When they started with that, people said it's completely impossible. Experts said it's completely impossible. It's a pipe dream, right? Not in the next 50 years. Now, SpaceX is not talking very much about that, right? But I bet you, if you get Elon Musk in the right moment, he will admit that, of course, it's AI techniques that are key to landing those rocket first stages, right? So I know that this can play a key role. It's increasingly happening. Now, to the second part of your question, you asked, European AI versus global AI. Don't get me wrong, right? I mean, of course, it needs to be a global thing, but I think it can and should be led, or at least co-led, out of Europe. And the reason for that is that in Europe, we have understood one thing better than anyone else on the planet. I firmly believe that. And it's been a hard lesson historically, a very painful lesson, but I think we've basically learned it rather well. And that is to bring together a diversity of perspectives. And that is so invaluable, because it doesn't just mean we can do more because, you know, we can sort of feed off each other's competence and complement that, put that together, but also because the things that we make that work for all of Europe very likely will work far beyond Europe, because they're already made for a diversity of perspective. You see what I mean? If you just make something for the American market, that's also quite diverse. We don't see this so much looking from outside, but it's also quite diverse, but not nearly as diverse culturally as Europe, right? So if you make something for the American market, chances are that it will not work even in Australia, right? But if you make something for the European market and it actually works in Portugal, in Norway, in the UK, in the Czech Republic, right, in Vatican City, then you know it's likely going to work in a major part of the world. Not everywhere, right? But this brings something, right? And so therefore, I think very much as with ESA, with Earth observation, where we're global leaders in a global alliance that happens to be based in Europe and driven to a large extent by European values as well, I think we can make a global alliance that's firmly anchored in Europe. We don't have to control it. We don't even necessarily have to lead it, but we should make it happen, right? We should help make it happen, and we should have a major investment in it.
Yes, thank you. I think the key is here global alliance, no? Being a leader and also global alliance to work together. Second question, and then I give to the participants. I know that you contributed to this new documents from the Commission. The new documents were called Regulation on European Approach for Artificial Intelligence and the Coordination Plan. You did contribute. And what's your opinion? Why you think it's not enough for the Lighthouse approach you are?
Well, let me put it this way. So first of all, I really can't take any credit there personally, right? It's like when you say your vision, right? I mean, in reality, it's a vision that I'm very happy is shared by basically tens of thousands of people, and I happen to be sometimes a bit of a voice for some of them, right? So I feel very privileged in that. But you know, I don't think it's me. And likewise, when we say, you know, in Claire, we had an impact on the Commission's plans, and that's demonstrable. It's not because of me, of course. It's because we consulted very broadly with our supporters, with our members and beyond, and then fed this back in a very structured process to the Commission, right? And the Commission actually is pretty good in taking feedback from a broad range of stakeholders, not just us, right? But certainly what we brought was compelling, I like to think. And certainly it created a bit of unity out of diversity, namely diversity that is our big ecosystem within Claire. And I think that convinced them to some of our ideas, right? And we're very happy to have been able to contribute with that, right? So the other thing is the Lighthouse, right? And so to be perfectly honest, you know, Claire was the first to talk about a European AI hub. And the Commission then basically more than 2 years later started to talk about an AI lighthouse of sorts, right? So that can't have been coincidence. And we did a large amount of lobbying and convincing to get there. But now we're in this precarious state where, you know, there are some people who say, well, you know, if you concentrate it in one place, maybe I won't get any of it, right? So it's the opposite of not in my it's the opposite of not in my backyard. It's unless it's in my backyard, I don't want it, right? And we need to overcome this, right? We can't think like this. If we would have thought like this everywhere, we wouldn't have a European central bank, right? We just wouldn't have it. We wouldn't have the euro. We wouldn't have the Schengen Agreement. We need to think beyond just, unless I can have it, nobody should have it either, right? And the way to do that is to design it right. And that is one of the areas where I feel the Commission hasn't been listening enough yet, right? But of course, they're very busy people, you know, and I'm the first to admit that their regulatory proposal, I mean, this is a huge thing, right? I can totally understand why that kept them very occupied. And I'm not saying they made a mistake. Personally, I think it's a good thing that they focus on this, right? Because somebody has to, and very much in the lines of what I said earlier, I think it's good if Europe takes the lead in this, right? And we do, right? But it can't stop there. It really can't stop there. And now we have to go back, and now that maybe some of their bandwidth has been freed up, some of them actually really need to think into, look further into that. And there, I think we can learn something from our friends in the UK who sadly left the union, but are still our friends and are still very much part of our plans, right? And what we can learn from them is that if you're serious about AI, you don't leave, the pursuit of an AI vision to lower levels of some ministry. You don't do this. You make a ministry for AI essentially, or an AI office. That's what the UK has done. The Commission has not done that yet, right? For the Commission, this work is done by capable people deep inside a few DGs. That's not the way to do it, to be honest, right? So what I think they really need to do is they need to make a commissioner that has that responsibility. And I know that Breton has some of it, right? And and Vestager has some of it, but they need one person who has the vision, who really focuses on that, who has a large staff of people who makes this happen. And until they do that, they will not succeed in investing in AI efficiently and effectively so that we can actually compete. What they will succeed in is spend a lot of money with very little effect, and nobody wants that. They don't want that. We don't want, the citizens don't want that, right? So they need to make this a real priority, and they need to have real leadership on this. So my hope is that we'll see that happen over the next few years. Claire will certainly lobby for it. In my role wearing the vision hat, I will certainly push hard for that. Because we see it again with the centers of excellence. They're great things, right? But they're underfunded, hopelessly underfunded. And if it weren't for the coordination that we provide through Vision, they would do great things each on their own and a few things together, but they would be loosely coupled. We're trying our best to sort of couple them a little bit more strongly, also together with the AI4EU, as you probably know, right? Which has a similar goal, bringing things together. But we need more, right? And we need the Commission to really strongly bring these things together. And there, Lighthouse is a great thing, right? Because it's a natural way of bringing things together.
Okay, so now, my audience, I come to you, Georg Rehm. Now, your question. It's unfair that I ask all the questions. Thanks very much for the excellent talk, Holger. In addition to the vision.
Hang on for a second. Can I take a guess what Georg is going to ask about? And if I'm wrong, then I owe him some beverage, okay?
Okay.
I'm going to guess that Georg is asking me about language technology and whether it's to the extent to which it's an important thing. Am I right?
So let's finish. So we also need good topics that European AI should concentrate on. You mentioned some of them: climate change, electromobility, the space sector. In addition, I'd like to suggest concentrate on the language challenge. Yes.
Oh, there we go.
Well, so now, but the question is not finished. Language challenge, the challenge of multilingualism in Europe. We are currently working on input for the European Union as the European Language Equality Project, developing a strategic research agenda for establishing digital language equality in Europe by 2030. This critically includes substantial research in AI, of course. And here, you're missing the question, Georg. So he just told us they are also working on great language challenge. So now, question.
So I think his question is, why the heck didn't you talk about this, right? And my response to this is, Georg, of course, you're entirely right. Language diversity is very, very important. That's actually one of the things that, societies elsewhere, such as the American society, they have a real problem with this, right? I mean, you can see that in the United States right now, I mean, this is my personal analysis, but having lived for 20 years in Canada, basically just next door, which also has language diversity, by the way, right? Has had for a very long time English and French, plus native languages, of course. I think the US is hopelessly behind in dealing well with language diversity. And that's only basically 2 languages, right, that they're dealing with. And in Europe, we're dealing with, I don't know, Georg will have a better count, but a large number of official languages. So this is absolutely crucial. This is something we have experience with. It's also something where technologically we have a lot of prowess, right? I'm just saying DeepL, right? And DeepL is performing by, I think, official standards better than Google when it comes to automated translation. Still not perfect, but good enough that, I run things routinely through that I only have in Dutch, for example, and then publish the English translation with very little hand polishing. So amazingly good technology by DeepL, which is a European company, right? And actually, I think it's still European. It hasn't been sold out to the United States yet. Yay, I hope it stays that way. But, Georg is right. Language technology is one of these areas. Now, what I would say is that language technology is a bit of a double-edged sword, right? I think it's very good to see smart people and sensitive people like Georg and his colleagues so deeply involved with that, because what you don't want is you don't want to lose the diversity that comes with language by sort of having automated translation take away the last little incentive to learn other languages, because learning languages means learning culture, right? And once you stop learning languages, you stop learning as much about the culture. So there is a delicate balance, and I'd much rather have that balance driven by people in Europe who are aware of this a little bit more than elsewhere in the world than some big company in the States or in China. And so therefore, I think Georg is right in saying that language technology is sort of one of these challenge areas and one of these key technology areas, and also, if I may say, has really large overlap with AI. And I'm personally very happy to be involved in this effort that Georg mentioned, which I think is a very important one.
Yeah. So now to the ladies. Ina Kokinova. It's a little bit similar what I asked. Going beyond global competition on AI, is there a room for cooperation between the EU and other states?
Absolutely. I mean, as I said before, first of all, I should make this very clear. For instance, when I say Europe and Claire says Europe, we don't mean the EU. What we mean is Europe geographically defined, which interestingly enough is a somewhat vague concept, right? There's different definitions for this, right? So according to one definition, for instance, Russia is part of this, right? According to other definitions, maybe only partially or whatever, right? So it's telling that we can even have a conversation about what the definition of Europe geographically defined is, but certainly it's much broader than the EU. And so that is the first thing. The second thing that I said, and I really want to emphasize it again, all the big European success stories have involvement from beyond Europe. Certainly CERN and ESA very much fall into that category, right? Canada, for example, is majorly involved in both CERN and ESA, right? Canada, I mean, that's certainly not Europe geographically defined, and also, you can argue about Europe culturally defined, but certainly, Canada has as much North American stake that it has European stake. So absolutely, we should do this together with others. But, we should not settle for the weakest compromise. And that's sometimes an issue with global efforts, right? If we talk and talk and talk until we find something that everybody can agree with, what will invariably come out is something pretty weak and non-visionary, and it's not a big thing, right? And so therefore, I'm of the deep conviction that we do something that maybe not even all of Europe, but a core of Europe thinks is good and worth going for, and then we go for it, and we make a coalition of the willing, and we get Europe on board, and we get partners from outside of Europe on board, and we do it for Europe and the world. And one of these things is actually GPI, the global panel on AI. Now, I think what they're doing is very valuable work. I don't think they will do the work for us that I outlined, but this is an effort that I think is worth supporting for Europe. But in order to really do a big thing, we really have to invest in Europe, and that means the EU, and that means EU member states first and foremost. We can't get out of that responsibility.
Yes, I wanted to mention this global PI because I was there when Macron, we were in Paris, Philippe Sosolek and I was there, and was basically Macron said in G7, they basically promoting it, no? And so there are global associations out there. And thank you very much for your exciting, inspiring talk. This comes now from, let me give also Mohamed Reza Amirian. Hi. Thank you very much for your exciting, inspiring talk. I'm a researcher in explainable AI and target at understanding the methods and aiming at developing trustworthy and robust AI. The main challenge of our research is to determine the merit of methods quantitatively based on trustworthiness, as a quantitatively based on trustworthiness and human-centeredness criteria. Are there benchmarks and measures to evaluate our developments based on it?
Well, Mohammed, this is a great question, right? And, my honest answer is there might be some, but not nearly enough. And that's exactly one of the reasons why I said earlier in these 6 lessons that I shared with you that you can't just take AI and then sort of make it trustworthy and explainable and transparent. It doesn't work that way, because it starts from the ground up, and that means, you know, creating new kinds of benchmarks, creating new kinds of metrics, looking at the thing we're building through a completely different lens. And Mohammed, I know that you and your team and many others in Europe are starting to do that, and that is hugely encouraging. But let's not kid ourselves, right? This is something that will take an enormous effort and also a good deal of time, which is why we should have started really yesterday and a year ago with that. It's not too late, but you know, and this is where I really think the Commission doesn't get it, and that's because I think, quite honestly, they don't have the right technical advisors. At least I haven't met anybody who made this point to them in the clarity and with the kind of impetus that it needs, right? It's quite simple. You can't just take Horizons Europe and scale it up a little bit and say, yeah, then in the member states and industry put some more money and then it's going to be all right. That's not the way this works. The way this works is like the Human Genome Project, right? It's to say we're doing something that is changing our future. We're doing something that nobody has ever done before, and that's very hard to do. And therefore, we need to put a lot of money in. And, you know, until about a year ago, I was sympathetic to people who said, well, it's politically impossible to, you know, to mobilize on short notice hundreds of billions of euros or trillions of euros. But COVID has shown us differently. COVID has shown us that absolutely in the hour of need, it is not only possible, but also responsible. And it's just the thing that we as Europeans do, that we mobilize, you know, our resources for the benefit of everyone, right? And so we've done this for COVID. We can do this again for AI. And the good news is that COVID was an emergency that, you know, it's going to pay off in terms of we get something back that we almost lost, right? AI will pay for itself, not just in the long term, but in the medium term. So this is an easy investment to make, but we need to make it. And if we don't make that investment, then it's, you know, isolated groups here and there like Mohammed's that have to do this, and they will soon be dominated by people who do it elsewhere, industry interests and so on. And that wouldn't give us the kind of thing that we want, you know, that wouldn't give us the kind of thing that the public has a major stake in for the benefit of the public. And that's what I hope we can jointly bring about, right? That the public decides to invest majorly into the AI, into a kind of AI technology that is good for everyone, not just for a few chosen ones that happen to have invested in the right stocks or that have the right amount of resources or that happen to be working in the right sectors. No, it has to be beneficial for everyone. It has to help us solve the big problems that we have.
Okay, so there are many more questions, but the time ran out. So I thank you very much. Thank you, Holger, especially. Thank you for your great answers, your great presentation, and it was a pleasure to have you here. So
allow me to say one last thing. It's not going to take long at all. Last week we had an event where there were hundreds of questions we didn't get to answering for Vision. Now there is an event where there's again many questions which I don't get to answer. I'm very sorry about that. We're doing something about it. This Friday at 5 o'clock, and there will be news on this on the social media, we will have a 1-hour question and answer session. I will be there and 2 of my colleagues from Claire, and we will not tell you anything. We will just answer questions for 1 hour, and we will keep every answer to 1 minute so that we go through a lot of questions. So you're all invited. I hope our friends at AI4EU will help us on short notice to spread the word. But because I feel there are so many questions and people want answers and they want to talk, let's do this.
Yes, sounds good. But 1 minute answer? Wow, 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 Holger.
Practicing on it, huh?
Good, but send it. I'm promoting it. No? So send
wonderful. Thanks a lot. Pleasure to have been here.
See you. No? Bye-bye.